Christine Brown was born April 18, 1972, to parents Rex Allred and Ruth Ann LeBaron. The LeBaron and Allred families are rival polygamous groups. Christine's father Rex was the son of Rulon C. Allred, the prophet for the AUB. The LeBaron's prophet Ervil put a hit out on Rulon and ordered his death in 1977.
At this hour, polygamous leader and suspect Ervil LeBaron is in Utah. Salt Lake County Sheriff Pete Hayward said federal marshals are escorting him to the county jail, where he will be turned over to the county. LeBaron is the man authorities believe ordered the execution of Murray polygamist Dr. Rulon Allred 2 years ago. Police say the two men may have been religious rivals. LeBaron is charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder in that case, but he has been hiding out in Mexico. 10 days ago, however, Mexican authorities turned him over to U.S. authorities, and he's been awaiting removal to Utah until today.
In their book, Christine writes the following, quote, "I was raised in a polygamous family just outside Salt Lake. My grandfather was the head of our church, which means my family has been closely involved with all aspects of our faith since I can remember."
On the outskirts of Salt Lake City, in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains, 85-year-old Owen Allred is the prophet of the Allred Group, a splinter faction numbering some 5,000 Mormon polygamists. Owen Allred claims his authority has been passed down by divine revelation. He left the established Mormon church because of his determination to pursue polygamy.
Beginning with, I had 11 wives. 3 of them have passed away. I have 4 wives that have borne me children, and the others have come into my family when they were past the age of bearing children, and they needed someone to love them and take care of them, and that was my privilege. Now, my girls, every one of them, I've been so thankful, yes, proud of the fact that my girls all love each other. I think they love each other, and I'm a little jealous sometimes they love each other more than they do me. But I think that's fine.
Growing up, Christine lived a very abundant life, as she came from a wealthy family. It is unknown how many sister wives her parents had or how many siblings she has, but one thing that is certain is her consistent perspective of her upbringing. In her eyes, she lived a great life and had amazing parents that exuded the perfect polygamous marriage. Though Christine grew up in polygamy, she wasn't convinced it was the right path for her, and like Mary, Janelle, and Kody, questioned if that was a life she was willing to live. She wrote, quote, "Although I was raised polygamist, it wasn't until I was 17 that I decided, without a doubt, that I was going to accept the principle of plural marriage. I reflected and prayed and turned inward until I had my answer. Eventually, I developed a strong testimony about the way I wanted to live my life."
I always knew that I would live a polygamous lifestyle. That's probably just because I was raised in it. So I wasn't ever interested in single guys. If they'd ask my dad about me, I would just turn them down.
This wasn't an easy decision for the teenager, but one significant person that played a huge role in her decision was her grandmother. Christine watched her grandmother, who was also a polygamist, enjoy the sisterhood she had with her sister wives, and realized that she wanted to have a similar experience. She wrote, quote, "The biggest influence on my decision to live the principle of plural marriage was my grandmother. She loved having sister wives and knew that the strongest relationship in her marriage was with them."
Elsie is Owen's second wife. They have been married for 56 years.
I was married, 10, 11 years before Owen took another one. And since me, every one of the wives have come to Owen and said they would like to be in the family. You find a good man and they all like to be there. And it wasn't for sex and all this all the time. It was like he said, one man said, "I'm dying. I'm not going to be here much longer. Will you please take my wife and take care of her? See that she has the needs that she needs." And that's what he did.
You never can explain the love that we have for each other. It can't be explained.
Can't explain love. I've seen a lot of monogamists. All they do is fight and quarrel. I think they're more unhappy than we are in a lot of situations. Also, this principle gives the wife a freedom. I don't have to be cooking every night. If I want to go somewhere, or I want to plan something.
It was settled. Christine was going to live polygamy. But she had a rule. Her rule was that she would only come in as a third wife. Christine wrote, quote, "If you are as committed to plural marriage from a young age as I was, you're less interested in the monogamous stage of the relationship than in the plural stage. People often think, incorrectly, that the first wife has the highest status and the most security. I never saw it that way. In fact, in my opinion, being the first wife takes too much work and involves too much self-sacrifice. You have to give up your life entirely and be joined at the hip to your husband. It's just you and your husband until the day he marries a second wife. This kind of single-minded devotion never appealed to me."
I decided when I was about 19, and I wanted to enter a plural family, wanted to enter as the third wife. I never wanted to be a first at all because I didn't want to be married to a guy by myself.
To Christine, being the second wife didn't seem like a better option either. She wrote, quote, "In fact, I think that would have been worse than being the first wife. The second wife has the hardest job and is put in the most uncomfortable position because she's the one that comes along and disrupts the marriage of the first wife and her husband. She's the wedge that comes between the couple."
And then I didn't want to be a second because I felt like they were a little wedge in the relationship, and I didn't want to be the wedge. I only ever wanted to be third.
Christine had the perfect solution and decided that she would only come in as the third wife, as she saw that role and position as the more fortunate one. She wrote, quote, "The third one? She's the lucky one. She's the one who comes along and makes peace between the first two wives. The third wife is in a blessed position. She doesn't have to face marriage on her own without the help from her sister wives, or bear the burden of breaking up a previously monogamous couple. I was going to be the third wife all the way." As Christine leaned more into her faith and her convictions, she would soon come across newlywed couple Mary and Kody. When she was 19 years old, her sister Wendy went on a survival trek with the church. The leaders of Wendy's group were Mary and Kody, a young couple that stood out. Christine wrote, quote, "When Wendy returned home from her adventure, all she could talk about was Kody. Kody, 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 Kody. She was full of stories about how strong and athletic he was. The next day, while at church, Christine noticed a handsome young man with an amazing smile. Although her sister Wendy never described Kody's physical appearance, Christine knew in her gut that this dashing young man was him. In the middle of the crowded church, Kody stood out amongst the group, and Christine couldn't take her eyes off of him. But he was so enthralled in his conversation that he didn't notice Christine eyeing him that day. He wrote, quote, "I have to admit that I don't remember seeing Christine in church that morning. I had been in the church for only 6 months, so the group was fairly new to me." A week later, the church held a dance that Kody and Mary attended together. This time, while at the dance, there was a woman that stood out to Kody and completely caught his eye. Wearing a turquoise dress with a lace ruffle at the collar, he couldn't stop staring at her. He wrote, quote, "She was bubbly and sweet and as cute as anyone I'd ever seen before. She was also overflowing with positivity. Her liveliness and good cheer were infectious. That bubbly woman was 19-year-old Christine, and the spark he felt for her was surreal." He wrote, quote, "When I looked at her, I had a feeling, call it a sixth sense, that our destinies were interlaced." Though Kody and Mary pledged their lives to polygamy, it was too soon to entertain or even think about a second wife. However, Kody felt an undeniable spark between him and Christine, something that he couldn't explain. He wrote, quote, "I was still a newlywed and new to the polygamous faith. Although I thought Christine was really cute, I wasn't yet ready to consider a second wife." And with that, he put his feelings and interest in her on a shelf and tucked it away. But he wouldn't be able to resist those feelings for long. As a newlywed couple, Mary and Kody frequently hung out with other young people who were usually single. They would invite them over to their house to eat ice cream and spend time together. Christine, being a young single woman, became a part of this friend group and would frequent Kody and Mary's home, leaving Kody to face his feelings for Christine head on. He wrote, quote, "While I had an inkling that perhaps something important was starting to develop with Christine, Mary and I weren't yet looking to add to our family. At the time, they were trying to have children, but unfortunately, as stated in previous videos, Mary was dealing with unknown infertility issues, which caused a lot of pain. The pain Kody and Mary suffered would also trickle into other areas of their lives. Kody would often desire to spend time with his friends without Mary, but would feel guilty that she would be left alone. The friend group they had appeared to connect more with Kody and accepted Mary because she was his wife. Outside of Kody, Mary didn't have much of a life or friends of her own, but that would soon change." Kody wrote, quote, "Eventually, Christine and Mary became friends, which was great. It was great for Kody as their friendship would allow him the opportunity to spend more time with Christine and not feel guilty about it. But there was a problem. The more he hung out with Christine, the more his feelings deepened for her, and Mary was not happy about that. He wrote, quote, "When I started to notice that Christine was growing more interested in me, and when I started visualizing a future together, I knew that exploring this would be unfair to Mary at this point. If Christine and I started hanging out alone, in essence, if we were to start courting, Mary would be abandoned by her two closest friends. Sensing Kody and Christine's connection and that there may be more going on than just a friendship, Mary voiced her feelings of dissatisfaction to Kody on multiple occasions. He wrote, quote, "Mary had inadvertently made it clear to me on several occasions that she wasn't prepared to court Christine. One weekend, at a field day for the younger members of our faith, I was busy being my loud, boisterous self. I was running all over the field we were gathered at, hosing people down with water. In the middle of all of this, I heard Christine cry out, 'Kody, my masculine man.' I looked over at Mary and I could almost hear her growling."
Christine flirted a lot with me, and I fell for it.
We were really good friends for about 3.5 years. We
met, we just hit it off.
And I always wanted to be a third wife. I figured that it would be the one that was the easiest.
Kody was quite the charmer, and everyone was drawn to him. They appreciated his charm, smile, and outgoing personality. When Kody joined Christine's church, he made quite the impression, sweeping many off their feet. According to Christine, he was nice-looking, which impressed a lot of the women. He was well-spoken and outspoken. He was confident and knew how to take a spiritual concept and deliver it in a positive, inspiring way. These traits drew Christine in, and she soon found herself smitten with him. But Mary's disapproval of Kody pursuing a relationship with her would put a stop to this budding romance. A year would pass, and the situation remained the same. Kody liked Christine, Christine liked Kody, but Kody was married to Mary, who was not interested in taking on a second wife. Keep in mind that during this time, Kody was also interested in Janelle, the woman that became his second wife. One day, Kody, Mary, Christine, and several other young people from their church took a trip up to Wyoming to Kody's family ranch. The group ended up getting caught in a snowstorm that delayed their trip by a day. Kody, Mary, and Christine all rode together. Kody wrote, quote, "Mary and I rode in the front seat, and Christine sat in the back. I kept looking at Christine in the rearview mirror. For months, I'd been watching her. I loved her spark, her bubbliness. She was so full of life and enthusiasm, just the perfect person to have along on a miserable drive. In fact, I was discovering that Christine was the kind of person I wanted to have around all the time. She lit up every room and brought a fun, positive energy to any event. Mary often stood on the sidelines during games and group activities, but Christine was always willing to participate in anything, no matter how silly." This road trip confirmed Kody's feelings for Christine, and although he saw her as the cutest woman he'd ever known, he did see her as something else, chubby. He wrote, quote, "Christine was the cutest girl in the world, although she was a little chubby. After being on the road all night, the trio stopped at a gas station to pick up some snacks and food." Kody wrote, quote, "Christine went into the Quickie Mart and bought herself what seemed like the largest portion of chili cheese nachos that I'd ever seen. The sight of those nachos turned my stomach. I couldn't watch her eat them. She must have been starving because she was eating so quickly, and there was chili sauce and nacho cheese everywhere. The sight of this chubby girl in my car devouring chili cheese nachos for breakfast put the brakes on our relationship. It brought out the most superficial and shallowest side of me. I still liked her. In fact, I liked her very much, but the whole nacho experience cooled my attraction a little. Well, a lot."
Watching her eat a plate of nachos nearly doused Kody's growing affection for her. Kody, there was a chili nacho cheese incident that nearly derailed this courtship.
I know, he was so silly.
Did you even realize
that pull down any relationship, please? Me wolfing down nachos, come on.
Kody wrote, "Christine was the cutest girl in the world, although she was a little chubby."
I was pretty chubby.
But does size matter to you, Kody? I mean, were you grossed out by, you said she was chubby and she was eating the nacho cheese?
I will be honest, I was not attracted to Christine in any kind of physical sense. I mean, I look back in retrospect and I wonder, was that fair? But I can't even look there because we have children together, we have a life together, we have a relationship, and we found our sweet spot.
So you were not physically attracted to Christine?
That's an understatement.
You were grossed out by her?
I won't say that, but the nachos grossed me out enough to make me go, okay, I'm waiting to marry.
How does it feel to hear her?
It's horrible.
Though Kody had developed feelings for Christine for well over a year, he couldn't shake the nacho experience, and it would take him some time before he ever saw Christine as a woman again. In the meantime, Christine's feelings for Kody grew, and it became a one-sided situation. At the time, Christine had no clue Kody was turned off by her eating nachos. In their book, she wrote, quote, "Of course I had no idea that I grossed Kody out with my nachos. I was an overweight kid who liked junk food a little too much."
I really loved him tons, and he kind of loved me, and we went back and forth. But it took years for us to get together and really realize we really did want to be married.
When the group finally made it to Kody's ranch, he used that opportunity to show off and garner attention. Christine details Kody's actions on this trip as him being nothing short of a true cowboy. She showered and praised him with adoration, affection, and constant compliments, saying that he transformed into a hero and was a total stud.
I found out that you were polygamous, then it's going to sound kind of weird, but I just kind of saw it as kind of a built-in way for you to be the center of attention all the time, which is exactly what you'd always been. And maybe I assumed too much, but that's kind of the way I saw it. Yes. This is how I could always be the center of attention. How can you not be with 4 wives and 16 kids,
Not only was Christine in awe of Kody, but Wyoming made a lasting impression on her. So when Kody's sister invited her to stay for the summer, she excitedly said yes. During her stay at Kody's family ranch, a local family expressed their interest and their faith. That family had a daughter that Christine described as beautiful and thin, something that made her feel very threatened. The girl ended up being invited to a youth event at their church in Utah, which Christine volunteered to drive her to. On the way there, Christine had incessant thoughts of the girl and Kody getting along and bonding, and convinced herself that she needed to interfere at all cost. When they arrived at the church, Christine's fear came true, as Kody immediately noticed the minor and took an interest in her. Christine wrote, quote, "Right away, Kody and Mary took particular notice of her. I was heartbroken and jealous, tortured by the fact that Kody seemed to find her more attractive than me. To make things worse, she and Mary hit it off immediately. They became inseparable, instantaneous best friends." Kody and Mary's relationship with the minor continued to blossom, and soon enough they would share very devastating news with Christine. After spending the day together in the city, Christine depicts the following story, quote, "Me, Mary, and Kody lingered on the porch of my parents' house. Kody and Mary had strange looks on their faces. They seemed excited, but a little nervous. Then they told me that they were courting the girl I'd introduced them to at the youth conference. I was devastated. It ruined my day. In fact, it ruined my year. I decided then and there that I was not going to marry Kody, no matter what happened. It wasn't because of Kody. It was because of the girl he and Mary were courting. She was too young and too cute, and I just couldn't see her in my future. I broke off the friendship. I couldn't be around Kody and Mary while they were courting someone else." Christine was heartbroken. She had spent so much time with the couple, invested in a friendship, and was totally receptive to the idea of being a part of their family. The fact that they chose a minor instead was something Christine felt she couldn't compete with. Though Christine felt like things couldn't get any worse, they did. A few months after hearing this upsetting news, her parents informed her that they were getting a divorce. She wrote, quote, "My parents told me they were getting a divorce. Even worse, my mother had decided to leave our faith, which felt like the worst kind of abandonment. I felt as if my world was disintegrating. I see no signs of trouble between my parents, and I couldn't imagine a life in which we would no longer be a cohesive family."
Ruth Ann Stevens had 6 children with her polygamist husband.
It's very fear-based. People are afraid to go there. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about the dark side of it because they want everyone to believe that this is the picture of perfection, that these are the laws of God, that there's no fault here. And so it's like if you cover it up, it perpetuates. You can't imagine the high degree of secrecy. People are so afraid to talk about anything that goes on. The shame that is brought upon you for thinking or feeling these things. But it was just this whole concept that you can't live from your heart and soul. But I remember when I knew that I was going to be leaving, and it just terrified me, because I am going to go to hell. I am choosing to go to hell, but my life is hell.
Christine always saw her parents' relationship as perfect and ideal. The fact that they were divorcing was a huge blow to her soul. She shut down and completely detached from all her friends. She no longer associated with Kody's circle of people who'd known her family when it was intact. She wrote, quote, "I turned inward. I told my father that I wasn't interested in dating, and that if a boy approached him and expressed interest in me, I didn't want to know about it." With the demise of her parents' marriage, Christine questioned the concept of marriage and needed time alone to reevaluate her faith and belief system. Though she completely cut Kody off, she would, however, talk to Mary on the phone from time to time. She wrote, quote, "I resisted these phone calls because I didn't want to hear about the courtship. It had been prolonged because Kody and Mary wanted to wait for the girl they were courting to turn 18 before making their engagement official. Once the girl turned 18, the engagement was announced and the wedding date set. But something unexpected would happen. 1 week before the wedding, Christine received a shocking phone call. She wrote, quote, "I was standing in the kitchen when I answered the phone. My heart nearly exploded with joy when Mary explained that the wedding had been called off. It was the happiest day of my life. I felt as if I could re-enter the world again. I immediately welcomed Mary and Kody back." Christine was elated. With the girl now out of the picture, she felt that she could properly pursue a courtship with Mary and Kody. But once again, something shocking happened, leaving Christine to feel as though she had been punched in the gut. She depicts the following story, quote, "One day, completely out of the blue, Kody called me up. 'Christine,' he said, 'Janelle is driving me crazy. I can't stand it. She really frustrates me.' 'Who's Janelle?' I said. 'You know her,' Kody said. 'You've seen her here and there.' Christine was quite taken aback. She had no idea who Janelle was, nor understood why Kody was bringing this problem to her. If he couldn't stomach her, this woman named Janelle, then he should stop associating with her, Christine thought. Problem solved, right? Well, not really. Before Christine could catch her breath, Kody had married Janelle. Christine wrote, quote, "I thought this was really weird. After Janelle joined their family, they moved to Wyoming. I had just let Kody and Mary back into my life, and now they had moved away with another wife. I hadn't just lost a man who was special to me. I'd lost my best friends." Kody, Mary, and Janelle's relationship wouldn't be a walk in the park, as Mary had a hard time dealing with her new dynamic with Janelle. Though Janelle was married to Mary's brother prior, and the two had developed a friendship, welcoming her into the family as the second wife was quite a difficult transition. The two had a lot of tension, and things were not smooth.
There's a first wife, a dominant wife, a favorite wife. My husband's seventh wife was the favorite. We all knew it. He stated it, and she was. We just accepted that because it was she was. I've seen in many homes the first wife is the legal wife, and she's usually the dominant wife. And she can be the favorite, but sometimes she's not. So she really takes her power and in her anger takes it out on everybody else. I've seen homes where the first wife will tell you whether or not you can sleep with your husband, whether or not you can even have a turn. She watches if you've been obedient.
After some time had passed, Kody and Mary traveled back to Utah to visit her parents and invited their old friend Christine over for dinner. But a lot had changed, and the Christine they once knew was completely different that night. Kody wrote, quote, "I was used to the bubbly Christine, but when she showed up that evening, I immediately sensed an underlying sadness and turmoil within her. It made me sad to see her struggling." During a one-on-one conversation and after much insistence from Kody, Christine would share with him that her parents' divorce was causing her emotional distress. He tried to comfort her by giving her the following advice. He said, quote, "You know, Christine, this whole ordeal may help you in the future. It will make you stronger and more self-aware. And one day, you're going to marry a man who is going to appreciate that you've been through something like this and that you have survived it." If Kody thought this advice comforted Christine, he was wrong. It actually made her feel more distraught, as it appeared as though he was implying that he was not going to be the man she would marry. Christine wrote, quote, "That night when Kody left, I stood at the door to Mary's parents' house and said, 'Goodbye.'" "It's not goodbye," Kody said. Even though Kody's line was cheesy, it sent a current of electricity down my spine. He was flirting with me. I knew that no matter what he said, Kody was still the one for me. A few months later, they all attended a New Year's ball at their church, giving Christine and Kody an opportunity to reconnect. The next day, Christine made a bold move and told Kody how she felt. She said, quote, "Of all the guys I know, you are the one I'd want to marry." When I got back home, I immediately approached my grandfather, who was the head of our church, and said, "Should Kody Brown ask, tell him that the answer is yes. Let him know that I definitely want to be a part of his family."
I just like the idea of having someone around. I just like the idea of sister wives a lot. I honestly wanted sister wives more than a husband for a good time of my life. I wanted the whole family. I didn't just want Kody. No, I wanted everything. There's situations where a girl will come into a family and just want the guy, and it rips the family apart. I wasn't interested in that. I wanted the family. That's what I was interested in.
And not long after, the two were in a courtship. Kody's second wife, Janelle, was thrilled and very accepting. His first wife, however, not so much. He wrote, quote, "Janelle was very sweet and accepting of my courtship with Christine. I knew that things were difficult between her and Mary in the house, and I believe she was hoping for a new sister wife to be her ally or friend. Mary was slightly more prickly when I started courting Christine."
I guess after you get two wives, guys are like, ah! And then a third wife comes along, and they actually say if you're having problems, and like when you have two wives, when you're having problems, marry a third, because they'll even it out. So I only ever wanted to be a third.
After spending a weekend together, the two got engaged. Christine was over the moon and quickly began planning their wedding. Kody, however, wasn't too thrilled and started getting cold feet. He wrote, quote, "I wanted to prolong our engagement, but Christine didn't want to. I tried telling her that I wasn't quite ready, but Christine felt that she'd already waited so long. We'd been friends for 3 years. We decided to get married in 6 weeks." With everything moving forward in such a fast manner, Kody began to regret asking Christine to marry him. He admitted that he had once again moved too quickly. He wrote, quote, "I was in way over my head. I was not even 25. I already had 2 wives, and Janelle was expecting our first child. The thought of trying to bring Christine into a family gave me serious pause."
When I first found out that Janelle and Kody were expecting Logan, it was real difficult for me. I really kind of expected that she would get pregnant before I did. By the time Janelle came into the family, Kody and I had already been married for 3 years and had no success conceiving. So I really expected Janelle to get pregnant before I did. And so even though I expected it, when it happened, it was still difficult to deal with. Even though I had already made the decision, and Kody and I had already made the decision that we're going to bring more wives into the family at some point, it was still a difficult thing to deal with. There are jealousies. I was jealous. I just was. And Kody was really good and really patient about, just kind of helping me through it and showing me that he still loved me. And I knew he did. It's just, I was insecure about it, And then on top of that, Janelle getting pregnant, that was really hard because not only, is he just having a baby with his new wife, I'm not able to. I mean, just the fact that I felt very inadequate. It's like, so what good am I? I can't give you any kids. It was really hard.
What was he to do? He couldn't call it off and risk breaking Christine's heart again. There was a lot going on behind the scenes that Christine was unaware of. She didn't know Kody was working a job that he hated. She didn't know that Mary and Janelle hated each other and that she would be stepping into a hostile home environment. He wrote, quote, "Christine didn't know how tense things were between Mary and Janelle. They were miserable with each other, and I didn't know how to mediate a truce between them. And now I was introducing a third wife into an unstable environment."
Can you imagine moving in with your sister and her husband into a little 3-room house? I actually felt like I was an intruder. I felt like it really wasn't any part of me. I wasn't able to bond. I wasn't able to show any affection or anything in front of my husband. In fact, when I got married, my sister attended my wedding as all wives do. The the wife will take the hand of the next wife and give her to him and you say yes, and then you take her hand and place it in his hand and give her to him, and therefore you can never complain. When you feel bad or you have jealousies, they'll say, why, you gave her to me. Why are you feeling so bad? You gave her to me. We were told that by living together and by having all these wives, that we would overcome our rough spots and our jealousies and our bad, our bad negative traits. But I want you to know that I was a very jealous woman. I wept many a night when my husband was in sleeping with another woman in the same house that I was living in. I felt that I wasn't valued. I felt that I didn't have my needs met. I felt that I should just go and be obedient, but it led to an existence of despair, or just an existence of denial. You can't be a good mother when you're just trying to cope and trying to get a little crumb of love yourself.
While Christine organized the wedding all by herself without any input from Kody, Kody was at his wits' end and detached from his reality. He didn't plan a honeymoon for them and was very unprepared. He was too busy trying to mediate the hostility between Mary and his pregnant wife Janelle, who weren't interested in helping him deal with his reservations regarding Christine.
It's not a peaceful existence. Behind the scenes, it's not Happyville. And there's horrible trouble between the sister wives. It is not a pleasant way to live. It's horrible.
Lying in my bed when in the very room next door, he's making love to another woman. It's torture. It's torment for a woman.
You've given a wife to your husband, and the first time that they go to her, it kills. I thought I was literally going to die. I was begging for death. I was just, could hardly breathe.
To see him leave you and your arms and your home and know that he's going to another wife or more than one other wife is beyond difficult. It's heartbreaking.
And so those women with those big smiles on their faces have denied their true feelings. They've buried it and they've put on a plastic facade. I'm not jealous of my sister wife. I love her. Oh, really? I just think you don't feel your feelings anymore. Denial was my drug of choice, too. For you feel like all those feelings and emotions that you have, you're taught that they are wicked and evil and that you need to repent. You never know for sure that you have a home in heaven. There's never a day that you know. It's always work, 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 try, try, try. Hope, 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 pray, pray, pray.
With all this going on, Kody still made it to the wedding, but with a grim, distant look on his face, and was completely emotionally removed from the situation.
When we decided to get married, like many plagues do, you just don't take time to get married. It's awkward for the wives to see a courtship and all these things. We literally got engaged and set a date, and you went off planning it, and I continued working, and we weren't even near each other. We were in two different states. It was a hard month prior to coming down from Wyoming to my wedding in Utah, and I had a 1,000-yard stare, and I wasn't engaged into the experience. It was hard.
Our wedding day was sad. It was a little bit sad. I hadn't seen Kody for a long time. We'd just been talking on the phone. We hadn't connected. I hated my dress.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. We just did not make a big deal out of any of it. None of it.
When we got married, the culture was really about exonerating the first wife and keeping the second, third, or however many wives sort of quiet. Polygamists lived in secrecy with social stigma, jail, felony, legal repercussions. A plural wife was always kept a secret.
Christine wrote, quote, "I was shaken when I saw Kody show up at our wedding with that look on his face. I was even more devastated when I learned that he hadn't planned a honeymoon. On our honeymoon, which consisted of us driving through the sticks of Montana, I was struck by the realization that I didn't know Kody very well. Once we got into the car, he still had that faraway look on his face. He seemed distant and unreachable. Until our honeymoon, I had thought he was a fun-loving guy, but that was the extent of it. I realized that I had idolized marriage. I had this silly notion that the moment you got married, your problems ended. I was fixated on the idea of your happily ever after. I thought marriage, especially plural marriage, would be absolute bliss, and I began to worry that I'd married him too soon.
I was the last wife, and I'd been the last wife for 16 years. And so when other women would talk about a new wife coming into the family, how hard it was, I just thought they were being ridiculous. When he started courting Robin, and I started to feel threatened, I started to feel abandoned, I started to feel insecure and not special, and I started to feel like that. And it was a shock, and it shocked me that he felt like he had to get married again. It was a shock. I'm like, what, suddenly I'm not enough? And you go through kind of a mourning process, because what you knew, it suddenly, it just didn't feel like it existed anymore. It was really difficult.